ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Grand Slam Journey podcast, where I, together with my guests, discuss various topics related to finding purpose, maximizing our potential, competitive sports, life after sports, and transitioning from one chapter of our lives to the next. If you want to learn more about my podcast, please browse my personal website and blog at grandslamjourney.com, which is a collection of my passion projects. If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider leaving your feedback. I know you can leave feedback on Apple Podcasts, which I would highly value and appreciate. Today's episode is with Zachary Green. Zachary's experience in the Marine Corps shaped his destiny. I often find that there are many similarities between Army, military, and competitive athletes. They both require a huge amount of discipline, grit, perseverance, teamwork, commitment, goal setting. I guess the main difference is that athletes, in most instances, do not fight for their life. Although there could be some high consequences in some risky sports such as downhill skiing, Formula One, race cars, etc. I still feel being part of Army, Marine Corps, Navy, whatever group of the military you're part of is very different. It's risking your life and fighting with people you highly care about must be an experience that truly I can't really imagine. Zachary's time in the military shaped the way he looked at his life. He then went to become a volunteer firefighter, and both of these experiences gave him the resourcefulness, integrity, and grit to become a highly successful entrepreneur. Taking risk, trusting himself, and never letting go of his dreams drove him to create, produce, market, and sell a product that saves lives. Zachary was named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, and he testified in front of the U.S. House of Representatives Small Business Committee. He also received an award from President of the United States for exporting, was invited to White House to share experiences as an entrepreneur. President Obama selected him as one of the top 10 entrepreneurs to represent the United States at the Global Entrepreneurs Conference. But per Zachary, the greatest honor was being selected to represent the 10 of clubs in the Frontline Leaders deck of cards based off of the deck that was used in the Iraq War to identify the high-value Iraqi criminals. The Frontline Leaders cards were produced by the U.S. Playing Card Company and developed by Captain Eastman, who helped distribute the original deck of cards in Iraq. Her goal was to find 52 veteran-owned companies and honor them with their own card. Lumaware was featured with other iconic veteran-founded companies such as Grand Style Apparel, Black Rifle Coffee, and many others. All these other warriors used what they learned in the military to battle their way through the challenge of being an entrepreneur. And that's a lot what we talk about on this podcast, as Zachary wrote a book, Warrior Entrepreneur, Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. In his book, Zachary claims that being a warrior and successful entrepreneur is the same, and the skills that helped him succeed on the battlefield are the same skills that carried him forward as an entrepreneur. We talk about the warrior principles described in Zachary's book, which are teamwork, purpose, confidence, tenacity, adaptability, never giving up, grit, sacrifice, morals, and serenity. We dive into grit, the importance of prevailing through crucibles, learning to overcome challenges, and the critical lessons that overcoming challenges teach us, how they sharpen the warrior's character and skills. We also discuss purpose, adaptability, sacrifice, and the importance of creating your Serenity practice and support system. I didn't create any quotes from this episode, as there are plenty of them available in Zachary's book. The link to Zachary's website and book are in the episode notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, you may also want to check out Zachary's podcast, which is named The Warrior's Voice Podcast, and the link is also in the show notes. And now, enjoy the listen. Zachary, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast. How are you today?
Great, Claire. I appreciate the invite and the opportunity to speak with you and your guests. Just another gorgeous, beautiful morning here in sunny Hilton Head Island, South Carolina.
Fantastic. What a fun city. I visited once. Maybe I'll fly there sometime in the future, and that way I have a person to meet. So hopefully we'll be able to meet in person one day. You. Yeah. So today's discussion will be a lot about your book named Warrior Entrepreneur, Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. I have to say, I read the book, came to me over the holiday, and it was so fun. It pulled me in, and I'm actually a very slow reader. I read it right between the Christmas and New Year's, and I think I finished it in 2 days. The stories were so powerful that I found myself just sitting on a couch and reading through it because I couldn't tear myself away. But before we dive into that, I give my guests a chance to introduce themselves. So, Zachary, please introduce yourself.
Certainly. Zachary Green. I've lived my entire life in Cincinnati. Joined the Marine Corps when I was about 18 or 19 years old. Left the Marine Corps, pursued a career in corporate America, doing everything from selling large software like SAP and other type of things. Went into the pharmaceutical business. Eli Lilly, I was in brand development and marketing there. And then joined our local volunteer fire department. And that's really what launched me on my entrepreneurial journey that I'm sure we'll get into here shortly. I'm now living down in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. About a year ago, actually almost a year ago exactly, we realized that, as we know, we don't have to go into the office every day. We can bring the office to us via telecommunications. And so I'm like, well, hell, I'm not going to live in Cincinnati. It's 6 degrees right now and snowing. Let's go down to the place we've been vacationing for the last 20 years. And that's what brought us down here.
Oh, wow. That's actually really creative. So during the COVID, you relocated to, I guess, better climate and better place.
Never in a million years did I think we'd leave Cincinnati. The house we lived in was our dream house. We loved the community. We loved everything. My dream as a little kid was always to have an antique firehouse to have as my office. And we found a place. You talk about history and tradition. The wood beams were probably 3 feet wide by probably 2 or 3 feet square. You could see the axe marks from where they hand honed it down. And literally Wednesday was our ribbon cutting ceremony. And on Monday, we went on quarantine and never really got a chance to use it. So that's what brought me down here.
Wow. Well, hopefully the COVID situation goes away soon. I'm hoping 2022 will get to some sense of normalcy and perhaps you'll have a grand opening or reopening.
Hell no, I'm never going back there. I'm staying down here. They can come down here and visit me.
So I do love a lot of things about your book, and reading through it and doing research. One of the quotes I have here, actually one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs: "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust the dots will somehow connect in the future." When I'm reading the book and learning about you, it almost seems to me that your life and journey unfolded itself for you, and not in an easy way, but in a way that all the skills and experiences you have had and gone through opened a door one step at a time. And then you said yes to this opportunity and kind of jumped in and used everything you have learned to grow and excel and create a path for yourself. How does this resonate? And maybe even tell us a little bit more about the book and what made you write it.
It's so great that you recognize that quote, which is one of my favorites. You know, our life is the sum of all of our parts. Some of those parts are good, some of those parts are bad, but they're all part of us. And what I wanted to do is go back and look at what really separates a warrior from a mere mortal. Now, a warrior doesn't mean you're going to be covered in a knight and shining armor or military. A warrior could be that mom, that single mom that's working 2 jobs just to try to help her kids get through life and have a better life than she had. The definition of a warrior is one is engaged in struggle and conflict. So when we unpack that and we look at that, my struggle and conflict started at a very early age. We're talking kindergarten, first grade, and my parents knew that there was something a little more there. And as I went through all the tests, they diagnosed me with very severe ADHD, multiple learning disabilities. Now, it's funny because when you're younger, it's called ADHD and it's a disability. When you get older, they call it multitasking. And then all of a sudden, it's this great thing. They say, oh, this entrepreneur, he's a multitasking, energetic entrepreneur. That's great. Well, that's the same kid that was getting in trouble because he couldn't sit still at the school. So I went to about 6 different schools from kindergarten through high school. And the common theme was every one of the teachers, you said, you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you're not going to amount to much, you're going to be a loser in life. And that never bothered me. That actually motivated me. It got me excited because I'm like, I want to prove every one of you guys wrong. And that's kind of that first step of that warrior journey is conflict. It's helping that iron sharpens iron. If you're going to be an athlete, if you want to lift weights and train, you have to go through those difficult times to get ready for the match or the game. And I feel that early childhood really is what prepared me for what laid ahead, which was incredibly difficult. And that is starting a company out of the truck of your car and growing it.
Yeah, I love it. I have so many thoughts. Just to comment the childhood, this seems to be a common narrative as I interview my guests. It is a lot of, I think, our upbringing that shapes us later on and how you embrace, I agree, the challenges that we may have faced when we're grown up, but also as we go through life. And usually the most successful people are the ones who, actually, my previous podcast, I was talking to, just to use it bluntly, that turn shit into manure and really use those lessons as something that strengthens character. And I was reviewing about 11 pages of notes that I copy pasted here from your book this morning, just to refresh my memory. And this is a constant narrative that actually throughout my notes and really the book you talk about so strongly. And it is so motivational that it's not really what happens to us, or, I mean, in a sense, yes, but it's how you turn it into your strength and the attitude that you have to then refine it.
I mean, you're absolutely right. You can't affect what happens to you. You can't affect how you react to it. As the great Vince Lombardi football coach said, it doesn't matter how hard you get hit, it matters how hard you get back up. And if you can start to look at all that struggle and that conflict as a gift, as something that helped train you, that's when you really can get to that warrior level. Now, there's a lot of people that look at it as a crutch and then they're holding it back. And what I always love to share is 2 stories of 2 fictitious people. One is very wealthy, goes to really nice private schools, drives an amazing car for his first car. Anytime he doesn't get enough playing time on the soccer pitch, the dad complains to the school coach and he gets his kid back in. Then they go to a fancy Ivy League school, participation trophies for everything that they do. As soon as they get challenged in school, they go to a safe space where that way they don't have to get worried and challenged. Then you got another kid that grew up in the inner city, no father, mom working 2 jobs just to help things, constantly in trouble, really struggled in school, gets into college, works 2 jobs in college just to try to get by. And both of them come to work for Clara. And Clara is known as this boss. Sometimes when she doesn't get her way, it gets a little angry. And so you sit them down and you start saying, you messed this project up, you weren't on time. The first kid's going to have to take a week mental health break. They're not going to be able to handle it because that'll be the first time in their life they've had to be challenged like that. The other kid's like, yes, ma'am, no problem. I apologize. Let's move forward. And that's really the theme of the book. It was originally written for entrepreneurs, but the book has expanded so much past that. It is for anybody that encounters struggle and challenge in their life, and how we can harness that and really live our best lives as a result of it, not in spite of it.
Yes, I agree. And I've actually seen myself a lot in the book. Obviously, it's about Aquarius and your experience of being part of the Marine Corps. I do find a lot of the mindset and I would say characters that you write about in the book very much are related to being what my definition is being an athlete, with the exception of, obviously, I don't know what it means to risk my own life. But in a sense, my tennis court has been my battlefield. And every time I step on the court, I need to go there with a confidence that I'm going to win. And I started playing way better when I went to the court with the confidence, this is my court. I own it. And I'm not going to let anyone take over this court because it's my field, sort of in a sense that you have to have that confidence.
And that's that warrior mindset that you need, not just in athletics, but also in business and ultimately also in life, is that whether you succeed or fail, the number one fight is going to happen up here first. And that's just setting yourself on that trajectory and that emotional strength to be able to say, we're going to make it through this. And it's not going to be easy, but because I've been challenged so much in the past, I'm ready for these challenges because I've trained for it.
Yeah. I wonder if there was a specific point in time, Zachary, where you actually realized that the skills you have learned throughout your life, or I know you talk about a lot how your experience being a Marine shaped you, also the experience of firefighter. I love how you connect the pieces of the puzzle. Was there a moment or like a key scenario you want to give an example that you realized that this is powerful and I need to get it out to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first real example was when I was 18 years old. I had just enlisted in the Marine Corps. I was down at Parris Island recruit training. Now, up to that point in my life, again, I did have a lot of struggles, but my parents were amazing. They gave me every opportunity. I was born with the proverbial silver spoon in my mouth. Great friends, great network. Everything came, I wouldn't say it came easy to me, but I didn't really have a lot of challenge outside of my learning disabilities. So I get down to Parris Island, which is arguably the most difficult military training probably in the world for their enlisted. Now, yes, there's branches like the Special Forces and Rangers and the SEALs that are tough, but those are separate units from the main group. After about the first or second week, which the job of the drill instructors is to really break you down, give you a level of stress and discomfort so intense that it ultimately breaks you. I failed really hard and really fast in that environment to the point where by the second week, I had what I guess you would call like a nervous breakdown. I messed up. I fell to my knees. I started crying uncontrollably. The drill instructor leans over me and says, your mommy and daddy aren't here to help you anymore. And I was a mess. Now, that was my bottom. That got me to the abyss. And we'll talk about the crucible and the abyss here in a second. What I thought was interesting is there were kids in my unit that came from the coal mines of West Virginia. They did not get a meal a day sometimes. Some of them didn't have a roof over their heads. Some of the kids were down in the inner city of New Orleans and Philadelphia. They didn't struggle that much. And the reason why was they had already built their rhino skin. That iron had already sharpened that iron. They were strong and I wasn't prepared. And that's what really, fast forward to 20 years later, when I started my business and I started having all these really difficult challenges that is very typical for a small business, cash, HR, personnel, not being big enough to be able to get a manufacturer to work with you. But I had already built my warrior skin up because I had gone through that. And I knew if I could make it through the Marine Corps and make it through what I did in the fire service, I'd be able to make it through anything else because of that warrior mentality. But all those kids that grew up in the inner city that dreamed that they could live in a big house like I did, have two parents, do all that stuff, it turned out they were better prepared for that experience than I ultimately was.
I guess the mental toughness and the creation of mental toughness makes me kind of look back on my past experiences and compare. And the irony of it, what it seems like you were describing, is the tougher your life is, sometimes the more resilience you're able to create if you, again, use it as something you can build on and kind of propel yourself forward as a learning instead of the crucible or the abyss. And maybe that's a good sequence here. I have to say, when I was reading the book, I had to really grasp what you mean by that, the crucible and staring into the abyss. Can you maybe describe it a little bit more for our listeners, how you look at it and the importance of learning to overcome challenges?
Absolutely. So that really is the hallmark of the warrior's journey. It's a 3-phase process. The first phase is resistance, conflict, difficulty. Now, that could be a summer tennis camp where your coach is making you do, sprints and doing all this hard work. It could be military, it could be whatever it is. But what that's happening at that point is helping you get stronger. When you lift weights, your muscles literally get destroyed. And then it rebuilds it back with more protein and more other connective tissue that ultimately is going to create larger and stronger muscles. So at some point in time, you're going to have a crucible. Now, that crucible is the turning point in your life where whatever has gotten you to that point is not enough to make it through this crisis. And that's really what it is. Now, the crucibles can present themselves in many forms. It could be a death of a loved one. It could be a bad work situation. Could be a drug or alcohol problem. It could be an abusive relationship. Who knows? In that crucible, there's 2 options. One is at the bottom is the abyss. The other one at the top is conquering that crucible. So now at the abyss, and the great philosopher Nietzsche talked about this many years ago. He says, if you stare long enough into the abyss, eventually the abyss will stare back and literally consume you. And the example there is the abyss stands for failure, darkness, death, destruction. That's literally the end. The longer you stare at that abyss, the longer you stay in that area, the harder it is to get out. And we know this. We've all had friends that have been in horrible, abusive relationships, maybe someone that's really had struggles with drug or alcohol problems. The longer they're in there, the harder it is to get out. It's like they're digging that hole deeper and deeper, and it's harder to get out. However, there's 2 things you need to do to survive the crucible and avoid the abyss. And before you do those 2 things, the first thing is you need to honor the abyss and respect the abyss. And when I say that is, you need to know what the consequence is if you don't make it out of that crucible. If you're walking down the sidewalk and a big, huge semi truck comes driving down next to you, the second you step in front of that truck, you're going to be splattered and instantly dead. Now, you don't spend all your time walking on that sidewalk thinking about that truck, but it's there. And you honor its strength and power, and you recognize it, but you avoid it. And that's the way you got to look at the abyss. Respect it, know that it's there, but don't spend too much time. To get through the crucible, those 2 things are real simple. You need to conquer and you need to transform. I use the word conquer because it's not surviving. You actually have to battle what got you there. You have to dig into those emotions that maybe caused you to be in that relationship because of something that happened in your childhood, or that job situation, or what's causing you to pick up the bottle or do whatever else. The final thing is to transform. And the transformation occurs by you doing different activities when you get out of that crucible, because otherwise you're going to get right back to where you were. My story is real simple. I had built this incredible company out of the trunk of my car, literally made $5,000 in 6 months. I decided I was going to quit my full-time job at Eli Lilly, dump all my life savings and credit cards and mortgage into building this business. The business was based off of the concept that I feel all businesses need, and that is, how do you solve a problem? At the end of the day, it's how do you solve a problem? And sometimes you have to explain to someone that they have a problem before they even know they have a problem, and then show them how you solve it. I got lost in a fire. I'm crawling around the hallway. It's completely zero dark. When I say zero dark, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And the reason I got lost was I was disoriented because I couldn't see my buddies. I couldn't see where I came in. So I wanted to invent a glow-in-the-dark material that would help other firefighters not go through that. And I worked with a bunch of developers. We came up with a series of products, really a brand. And the brand was about increasing accountability and reducing disorientation. We didn't necessarily say that we sell glow-in-the-dark problems. We really tried to focus on that problem and the way that we could cure that problem to build out of that. So I'll get back to my story in a second here. So now I built this company up. I go ahead to this trade show. I made $100,000 in 3 days. The problem was I had not enough money to buy the raw materials. I had no manufacturing partner that could produce that level of product. I had no way to distribute it, but I'm a Marine. And as the Marines, we learned you improvise, you overcome, you adapt, mission accomplishment, whatever you've got to do. And over the next couple of years, I grew it into a pretty good revenue business, but we weren't making a lot of profit. And the problem was I was doing everything. I had 15 employees. I was micromanaging the heck out of them because this was my baby. This was my thing that I created and nurtured. My identity was one with this company. And eventually we got to the point where I wasn't paying attention to the finances the way I should have. And I get a call from my CFO saying, Zach, we're 3 days away from liquidation. We're probably going to go bankrupt. Now, not only did that mean the company was going to be gone, but my company owed like $150,000 to American Express. Amex doesn't play around. They don't send you to collections. They get in a law office after you. I had a $400,000 outstanding note that my house was securing it, and I would have probably lost my house too. And so I had what I thought was a heart attack. I could feel my chest get tight. I could feel the numbness running down my arm. And I realized it wasn't a heart attack. It was actually a panic attack. Mm-hmm. I was in the abyss. I was in my crucible, and the abyss was the bankruptcy, the failure, all those type of things. What I did was I recognized it. I recognized this is a serious problem. Okay, this is not something light. To conquer it, what I had to do was make a change in our company. I got rid of a lot of my senior executives, and then I resigned as CEO for my own company. That was my transformation. And the reason I did that is I recognized that the company had grown bigger than me. And as the founders are really good at starting things. They're not always good at managing them. And by bringing in this new CEO that allowed me to focus on creativity in the startup, and that's really what I love. So fast forward to a couple of years ago, the company was starting to do better. We're moving along. COVID happens. And because I had that free mental space to be creative and innovative, we were able to modify our manufacturing process. So instead of making an exit sign that's this big, we made a barrier that was that big. And we became Home Depot's #1 distributor within a couple of days of COVID protective products, because I had that ability to transform, change, and get through that. Had the crucible not happened, we probably would have gone out of business within a matter of a couple of weeks early on in COVID. So here's an example of a horrible situation. I mean, literally almost took my life. And I was able to use the warrior traits to learn and grow from that and to make it through that crucible and be better as a result of those changes that I made.
Wow, what a fantastic example. And thank you for sharing that. It just reminds me all of the characteristics you actually wrote about in the book. And I love how you divided them by chapters. You start with teamwork, purpose, confidence, tenacity, adaptability, never giving up, grit, sacrifice, morals, and serenity. I literally loved all of them, and I love reading about your stories, and we would probably talk hours if we dove into all. But I do love just the example of the story you just gave and how you drawn different ones in different times. I think that's what to me stands out, even as I look at my past. And it seems to me that there's specific times where you may need to lean more on one versus the other. Was there a purpose why you picked teamwork as the first one in the book?
So there was no reason why I picked teamwork as the first, but there was a lot of reason why I put serenity as the last. And the reason why is we go through all this process. We talk about being tough and being strong. But if you can't manage what's upstairs and you can't have mindfulness and a good mental health and foundation, everything else doesn't matter. It falls apart. And the level of depression in the military is estimated somewhere around 30%, severe depression. We're talking almost to the point of suicidal ideations. And we know that a lot about the military. In the entrepreneurial community, it's over 70%. And the reason why is there's not a whole lot of groups out there that other entrepreneurs can talk to and have that network and that process. We hear that 90% of businesses fail within 10 years. Well, that's a pretty horrible thing. I mean, it's almost equivalent to losing a loved one when you've created a business and you lose it. what's happening to those people. And so that's why I really believe in Serenity. And there's several things in there that I talk about that are absolutely critical. And we've all heard them. It's getting good sleep. The number one thing you miss in being an entrepreneur is you don't get a lot of sleep. You're traveling. Number two, it's health. My health has failed considerably as a result of being an entrepreneur. Eating too much, not exercising the way that I should, and the stress that goes along with that. Finding escapes it could be somebody that likes doing high adrenaline things. I love racing cars. I love doing adventures like that. That's my way of programming. But other people, they just want to sit on the beach and relax for a week or two, and they need that. So that mindfulness and that serenity, and then also a faith. Doesn't necessarily have to be faith in God, but you do have to have a faith that there's something bigger out there than you and me. And there's some things that happen for a reason that aren't just coincidence. And there's also some things that there is no reason why it happened. And you have to be able to have the faith to give up to a higher power that they've got that understanding that you and I may not have.
Mm-hmm. What seems to me really, you need the serenity to be able to reflect and be self-aware. So going back to your story, I actually think is one of the most courageous things is to start a company and then realize that you leading it is not the best thing for yourself and the company and the people that you work with. So there's a huge amount of self-awareness. And to me, what stands out is reflection. There's also what you mentioned is the identity that we tie ourselves to. And I think this is the same. I 100% agree what you wrote in the book, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a warrior and you're part of Marine Corps. I find it the most challenging things is when you lose that identity, how do you transform or find a new one? Or you may not necessarily need to look for a new one, but the fact that you have kind of lost it, it kind of seems like part of yourself is not really there.
You're so right. And again, when I talk about the abyss as something you need to honor and respect, that's exactly why I needed the abyss to be very clear in front of me in order for me to make that very significant decision, which is letting my baby go to somebody else. It's literally like having a child and telling someone else, you can do a better job taking care of them, take care of them. And eventually in all businesses, it's very, very rare that the person that started the business ends up running it because it's a totally different skill set. The innovation, the creativity, the excitement of what an entrepreneur is very different than the focus of a CEO and the attention to detail and the follow through and those other things. Very different skill set. But I think one of the things that helped me, and to your point there, is when you're in a crisis, all options become available. You would never think of that option unless you get to that crucible and that crisis. And so what we need to do is realize there's other things that are out there that may be viable alternatives, but we haven't pushed ourselves to that situation because we haven't gone through that crucible yet. And again, that's where the crucible becomes a beautiful thing. It becomes a very defining thing.
Yeah. To the point, if you can conquer it, I love a lot of things about the book. One of them is your precision with which you picked quotes. I love quotes. And one of the African proverbs, you said, smooth seas do not make skillful sailors, right? And it's so true. There's so much that you can connect to, again, the serenity, self-awareness, reflection, and maybe we'll touch base on it a little bit later. But looking at all of the attributes you had listed, Zachary, is there one that you would really want to recommend people to start with? Or maybe a few that you really find critical?
I think there is one, and the one pretty much encompasses a lot, and that's the word grit. I don't know if there's really a true definition of grit, but when I think of grit as just being tough and having that rhino skin, when we look at sandpaper, we call it grit in the sandpaper because it's actually so tough, it's going to rub down whatever it's going up against it. Grit is not just not giving up. It's having that thick skin to take that feedback, that constructive criticism. It's having that tenacity. Every single challenge that an entrepreneur has, there is a solution to every single challenge without question. The reason companies fail and entrepreneur fails is one reason: the founder gives up and quits. And that's okay. I don't want people to think you can't, because you get to a point where the solution is so difficult and so stressful that it's just not worth it. One of those decisions for me was putting my house up as collateral. That's a real big decision, but I decided to do it. Other people are like, you know what, I'm done. But when you're running out of cash, and again, when you're in the crisis, all options become available. So grit's going to give you that tenacity. It's going to give you that confidence to be able to push through it and to be able to put yourself out of that comfort zone. All people see is this whole new generation of instant gratification, what success looks like. We go to Instagram to see what the perfect body looks like. We go to Facebook to hear the story about the guy driving the Ferrari and the other stuff. Now, what they don't know is the person with that body is sacrificing. Mm-hmm. They're not eating all the good food like I like to eat. Otherwise, I'd look like them. Two, they're exercising probably like crazy, and they're putting stuff out. The guy that's driving that Ferrari, I can almost guarantee you, anybody that's got a Ferrari worked their ass off for that car, unless you had really rich parents. But for the most part, you don't know all the stuff that goes in there. Rarely do you find people that just simply have it that lucky and that easy.
Yeah, I agree. It's easier to judge from the outside. And if you don't really know the personal journey or where people came from, it could be very easy to make assumptions about others. I do love the chapter about grit as well. I have a few quotes here. It's like, the world is competitive, brutal, and unfair. Every challenge that comes your way can be tackled, provided you have the faith, tenacity, and warrior spirit to tackle it. For me, a lot of the grit also connects to, obviously, the never giving up and attitude. We may not have the power of what happens to us, but we always have the power to decide how we're going to react to it. I know that's one of your chapters in your book as well about attitude. How does that play into your experience and the warrior journey?
I believe the attitude is more than just an emotional state. I believe it's an actual physical, biological effect. And this is the example I use for people. You go into a business meeting and you're sitting around the room, you're chit-chatting, somebody walks in. They don't say anything, they don't do anything. In the whole room, their energy is just zapped out of that room. You feel that negativism. You're at this work function, you get over next to this person, and before they even open their mouth to tell you about how bad their day was and everything else, you can just feel that energy coming out of you. Now, there's also the opposite, where that person that walks in the room and as soon as they come in, everybody gets happy. I can see that in you, Claire. You and I have never met, but I can literally see the glow around you and your expressions, and I can feel your energy. And you're the kind of person I want to hang out with because you're going to make it fun in whatever we're doing. There's other people, again, just by the scowl on their face, you can feel negative. So from an attitude standpoint, surround yourself with those positive people. Now, who knows what that person's going through? Is it a bad day? Are they having mental illness? Is there a problem? I don't know. And honestly, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, I don't care, because that's going to affect my mojo and that's going to affect me. I would love to help them out if I can. But at the end of the day, I want to surround myself with people that are energetic and that are out there and that are really trying to make you better because of that attitude, because the attitude is very contagious. It's like a cancer. It can grow through an organization and kill an organization. And it's something that needs to be figured out. And again, if we can help that person, great, let's help them. But at the end of the day, as a Marine, mission accomplishment, number one, troop welfare is number two. We have to do whatever we have to do to get that mission accomplished.
Yeah. And I do agree, mood is contagious. It's something as humans, and I think because we're part of the animal kingdom, we feel, I just relate to my dog, and it's funny, when I'm stressed, she gets stressed. So it's funny how animals sense it. And I give that example because I think we as humans have the same feel. Whether you're on a battlefield, on a tennis court, I always considered that to be something you can sense the energy. Obviously, there's also a bit body language going on, but a person doesn't have to say anything, and you can sense, even in a room, a thick air. So there's something that goes with the attitude. And the more and more I interview people and my guests, I find the importance of the support systems and the teamwork. And you talk about a lot in the book, the importance, we as humans are social beings. we will need others in some instances to support us and show us the path or help us find the confidence in the situations where we may be struggling ourselves. How does that play in, or give us a few examples that you want to get out to the world?
Teamwork is so important. That group is so important. I think the 3 reasons why we have such a horrible, horrible problem right now of veteran suicide. 22 veterans a day are killing themselves. It's a ridiculous number. And there's usually 3 things that can be attributed to. The first one is they lose their team and that support structure, those guys that we can sit around. The conversations I had in the barracks and out in the field with these guys were so unbelievably inappropriate, so disgusting, so over the top. But you know what? That was our thing. We like talking about that. We could do it in our space there. The second thing that happens is you lose your drive, because that really ties into the third one, which is your purpose. Having a team of people that have the same purpose. And that purpose could just be, hey, it's Saturday morning. Let's go play a game of tennis, and then let's have, some mimosas or something. Or it could be, let's study the Bible. Or it could be, let's do volunteer at a soup kitchen, whatever it is. Having that shared energy and that shared space lets you know that there's a purpose greater than you out there. And it helps you tie in with those people. And what happens is when you isolate yourself, you lose that purpose. And this happens a lot with entrepreneurs. Everyone else goes home and they're staying at the office. They're working late. So now they're sleep deprived. Again, they may be drinking too much. They may not be eating the healthy food, but more importantly, they're not getting the opportunity to be social and blow off steam and to have that love, not necessarily the love you have between a man and woman, but the love you have for your fellow person. There's the love in your friendship. The Greeks have something like 15 terms for the word love, ranging from erotic love to a family love to that other. There's a real love between a team, and a love that I had that was so unbelievably strong with my fellow Marines, guys that I probably would never hang out with if we didn't have the Marine connection, but there was a real something special there. And you probably saw it a lot as an athlete. Tennis is somewhat of an individual sport, but you really see that with a lot of other sports where guys and girls are together all the time.
Yes, it's definitely interesting and funny. When I play tennis, because it's so competitive, we talked about it with one of my friends, Irina, it can actually get very lonely, and especially at the top, because you all compete against each other. So you sort of have friends, you develop friends as you travel, but to a degree that I've actually got really tired of the loneliness. It can be just very tiring sport. I am realizing more now, actually, I just started playing recently, how much more fun it is to connect with people who play tennis and have fun attitude. I'm kind of uncovering a whole new world here, I think, within the past couple months of connection, of something that you really enjoy. And if you find people you enjoy doing it with, it's even that much more fun.
Hilton Head is arguably one of the largest tennis communities around. And they are ripping up tennis courts and replacing with pickleball because it's 2 people. There's no individuals. It's fun. It's not quite as intense. It's a little more fast paced in some cases. But again, it's more about the connection between the group rather than in tennis. You're really, it's one-on-one.
Yeah. I do want to connect on the purpose, because I think it's something everybody is looking for. You even mentioned in your book, the Simon Sinek, know your why. And it's funny, I had this reflection maybe 6 months ago. We do workouts outside. Obviously, it's COVID. We have our own home gym, and I was pulling a sled with about 80 pounds sitting on it and sprinting through the street probably like 30 times. And I was wondering, this is awful. And it made me remind myself, how did I do all the things that I used to do in tennis? And you wrote in your book also the quote you included, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger," Friedrich Nietzsche. It's funny. It's actually my conditioning coach used to yell this quote to us at 7 a.m. in the fall when we're running sprints in the mud in close to freezing temperatures. And when I reflect on all the things I have done, I really realize it's really knowing your why. And if you know the purpose and you connect to it, everything is just so much easier. Do you have any tips on how you found your purpose or where people should start with finding purpose?
Yeah, I mean, my purpose started at a very young age, and I knew that there was something great in the world I was destined to do. I didn't know what it was. And the more people told me that I was a failure, I was stupid, I wouldn't work, the more it gave me that resolve to show them that it was wrong. My business, and I built this business again out of the trunk of my car. It's an over a $30 million business. We export to 25 countries. There's one reason and one reason only I did this. And that is my purpose to make the world a safer place, to help the environment. Now, my ultimate purpose was to help my brother and sister firefighters not go through what I went through, which, by the way, happens to almost everybody. And that's going into a dark environment and getting disoriented, not finding your way around. So I was driven so strongly, and we had just had a line of duty death literally a couple of months before I started my business, where 2 firefighters fell through the floor. They were disoriented, couldn't find their way out, and ultimately burned to death. So I wanted to see how I could do things to help other people get that visual light reference point. So if they were ever in that situation, maybe I can make a difference. I get emails and texts. I just got one last week. I met a guy on the beach down here in Hilton Head. He's a volunteer firefighter in New Jersey. Talked to the guy, said, hey, I met the inventor of Foxfire. And this guy wrote this big text back about how great the product is and how that helps them see each other. That means so much to me. That's my purpose. And if you can be purpose-driven and lead with your why, as Simon Sinek says, everything else starts to kind of come together. And then other people, like-minded people, are going to be there. If your purpose is just money, there's a word for that. You're a prostitute, okay? There's other things. Now, the way I look at money is I love money. I love to make money, not because I want to make a ton of it, but because it's a scorecard. And being competitive like you, the more money you make, that means you're doing better, you're working harder, you're adding more value. And that's the way I look at it, as a scorecard. So the purpose of the money isn't so you can have more stuff. It's just verifying that what you're doing is right.
I do want to touch base. I think maybe a good sequence from purpose is sacrifice. And this is something I have been thinking quite deeply about in your book. Because to me, when you find true purpose, or you know the why, it really isn't a sacrifice. Reflecting even on my own journey and the things I have done, and people always say, oh, if you're a tennis player or a competitive athlete, you don't get to go to birthday parties with your friends when you're 13, 14 years old. You don't do the same things like other kids do. For me, I've actually never even thought about doing any of these things. And I've never really perceived this as something that I would miss. How do you look at sacrifice from the warrior perspective and connecting it to the purpose?
So as the warrior, you are that 10%, in some cases 5%. You're willing to do more. You're expecting less in return because your purpose is so much out there. But yes, sacrifice is something. They're one of my absolute favorite quotes, and it's anonymous, is entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't. I made some serious sacrifices over the last 5 to 10 years. I almost didn't see my kid growing up. I mean, thank God my wife has been my rock and helped out. And she ended up quitting her job. She was an OBGYN of all things, to take care of our son and to run the house, because there's no way both of us could have worked there. The sacrifice of missing birthday, the sacrifice of my health, not exercise, not eating right. Those were all things. But I knew I did that because now I'm downhill. We get a chance to walk on the beach every day. I get a chance to go to my son's wrestling events and do those things. I would have never had that opportunity. I know I wouldn't have had that opportunity had I stayed at Eli Lilly or on one of those other jobs. So I made the sacrifice, which was the risk of losing it all, the challenges and all those other things that happened because of that. And most people aren't really set up for that risk profile, that sacrifice profile. And so what I tell people is, if you say, okay, I want to make $1 million a year, there's very, very few jobs that you can just make $1 million a year. It's something you really have to have a lot of sacrifice and trust. Now, when you make $1 million a year, you also lose what's called the floor. So if there's no ceiling, there's also no floor, which means you can lose money. You can get in trouble. For me, the first 3 years, I made $0. Matter of fact, I made negative dollars because I was living off of credit card debt and personal finances. But I knew I wanted to hit that 7-figure day one day. Now, if you're a person that feels comfortable making that dollar amount and the risk of losing the money is not worth the benefit of getting that extra money, it's okay. You're going to have a very hard ceiling. You're never going to make more than X amount and Y amount, but you're also never going to make less than X amount and Y amount. And that's just something you need to think of. You need to have that sacrifice if you really want to get to that higher level. I mean, at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is no different than going in the casino and gambling. It's knowing how much to spend, when to leave, when to get up, and try to put yourself in the best situation that you can be for success.
Yeah. And definitely the risk you have taken is something that I would maybe judge that not many people are willing to do. So there's a saying that comes into mind is, if you risk nothing, you have nothing. So usually you need to be able to put in your full effort and risk in order to have more and create more for yourself.
Well, and I'll tell you, I am an adrenaline junkie. I've never felt more alive than when I was on the closest edge of dying in the fire service, in the Marine Corps, zip lining, doing whatever else. I thrive off of that risk. My brain's wired differently. A lot of entrepreneurs' brains are wired differently. The calmest and the most zen-like I get is when I'm sitting in the fire truck and I'm putting my gear on and the loud siren's going and I look up and I see the big black smoke and there's flames coming out of the window. I get to a zenness very similar to what that professional athlete gets when they're shooting that free throw and everybody else is noising around that, because I've been able to hone those skills and learn how to do that. So for me, I enjoyed the risk. Looking back on it, it sucked. It was no fun, but it was so exciting knowing that, you're right on the edge all those times. Thank God it turned out for the better.
And Zachary, would you say you have gained this skill by just practicing, or have you always been that way since you were born?
Yeah, I think I've always been that way. I was always the kid where there'd be 10 kids. Who wants to go first? And I'd be always the first one. I think it's a combination of too much testosterone and not enough intellect. And it's a dangerous combination, but most of the Marine Corps is made with guys like that.
I mean, in my opinion, and you may see it differently, if you're willing to risk your life for your country and your brothers, you have to have a low threshold of self-perseverance, I think. So,
that is absolutely true. I accepted at a very young age that I probably would have been killed or died. And it never bothered me because I knew my purpose was so big and that my reputation would live on even if I didn't, knowing that I was going to live a life of honor and purpose and serving others.
Adaptability. I want to dive into this one because it means a lot for me, even from my personal journey. I find as you grow through life, you have to adapt and adjust to different situations. But obviously, it's almost like different parts of my life as I transition from almost what I call one journey into another. What's your experience and what would you want to tell listeners about it?
There's a great quote by Mike Tyson. He said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So adaptability is really, really important. For us, again, we just had COVID. Had we not been nimble and adapt, we would have died. As creatures, we've adapted our surroundings. We've had things where we've changed over time to survive. And the ones that didn't change, they died. They didn't make it. So not just in life, but also in business. I'm repeating this more times than I probably should, but it makes so much sense. You can't affect what happens to people. You can only affect how you reply to it. And that adaptability is that saying that I'm going, because I have this purpose and I have this why and I have this mission, no matter what happens to me, I'm going to figure a way to get through that and come up with that solution. And if I can't figure it out, I'm going to find someone else that can figure it out. And if I can't do it, I'm going to find someone else that's going to do it. In the Marine Corps, we would have this issue called good initiative, bad judgment. And basically what that meant is, I'm glad you did something, but you really screwed it up. Nobody ever really got that much trouble in the Marine Corps for doing something and screwing it up. You got in a lot of trouble if you did nothing. And we go back to this whole fight or flight concept, the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. There's actually a third one out there too. It's fight, flight, or freeze. The freeze is the really bad one. It's okay to run away because if you judge, okay, that bear is coming at me and he can run 35 miles per hour and I can't, you know what? I ain't going to fight this one. But if it's this mountain lion that comes up and you're like, you know what, I'm going to raise my hand up and come after it, then you're fine. That's the right one. But if you freeze when that mountain lion's coming at you, that bear's coming at you, you're going to be dead very quickly.
Yeah. I can see how adaptability, probably even from your experience of being in a Marine, I can imagine you practicing special drills and how to work together. But when you're in the mission, you never know what's going to happen. There might be things that go wrong. So you need to adapt and adjust. And I can see how you've really exemplified this adaptability beautifully, even through your entrepreneur journey and how you had to change and figure things out through different situations.
Adaptability is one of those I call those anchor principles, because you have to have courage to be adaptable. You have to have flexibility to be adaptable. You have to have grit to be adaptable. You have to have teamwork, all these other type of things to be able to open up to all those other things that are going to be out there.
Yeah.
If I practice in the civilian world what I learned in the Marine Corps, I'd be thrown in prison for a very long time. However, it's not the act of blowing stuff up or killing people or doing whatever else. It was the intangibles they gave me to be able to use that. So when I look back at my time in the Corps, gift they gave me was learning to be agile and adaptable and improvise and do that stuff. So no matter what happened to me in life, I'll figure it out. And again, if you don't figure it out, find someone else that can help you figure it out.
I do want to go back through the Serenity and really dive into it, because what stands out to me as I'm listening to you is even just the example you mentioned, when I'm in the worst, in the crisis, that's where I'm at my best. I understand you seem like connect and you get present. And most important thing, I think, when you're in crisis is don't panic. That's where I think true leaders are born. One of the things I've been watching videos from Athletes World, Michael Jordan. You think the best athletes under pressure, they score and they thrive. And to me, it's a lot of self-management and connecting with Serenity and really being able to be still and see the situation with clear eyes. Do you have a Serenity practice? What would you suggest warriors, as you mentioned, struggle with PTSD? I have no clue how you could recover from some of the things that you probably see in battle, right? That alone must be hard. And it's something definitely the world has been starting to talk more and more about during the past couple of years, because I think this COVID situation created a lot of different things under population in general, because it changed our life in many ways. So I think it's being just more and more aware, how do we self-manage ourselves, our feelings?
One thing that I learned that I really loved, and it was a great gift, is transcendental meditation called TM. And all it is just 20 minutes of clearing your mind out. And it's just amazing. But the techniques that they teach you get down into the individual cells of your body. You can feel that clearing out. And I know, because it's a 20-minute session, 22-minute session you do in the morning and the evening. And I know I'm in my real zone when I choke, because that means I forgot to breathe. I've relaxed myself so much that I forget to take that breath, and I go, and then I catch it back again. So that's one area. Serenity, and that comes in a lot of different things. It may be having a drink after work. Sometimes that can result in bad things if you can't control that. Could be exercise, the endorphins and the things that come there. It could be, there's just a million different things. I can't tell you what works for me may not work for you. Some people is taking a nap. People like you and I, probably not going to be a good option. We'd rather go out and, exercise and do something to come back and have that good feeling afterwards. So I do want to talk back to one thing you were talking about when you're in that crisis, you're in that difficult mode, and how you're able to get calm. That's biology. That is not like something you choose to do. Your body has two systems called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. It has to do with your brain and the way that you work. And when you're faced with an emergency, so that emergency could be a car accident. If you've ever been in a car accident, one thing you'll notice is right before the moment of impact, everything slows down. You hear everyone talk about that. That is not coincidence. That's your body making a very defined biological response. It's going to flood your system with adrenaline and cortisol. It's going to change the way that your blood oxygenates into your brain and other areas. Your pupils are going to get really fixed. It's going to take the blood away from other parts of your body and focus it on your brain. And that slowing effect is your body's way of saying, okay, something life-threatening is happening, and let's try to process this. Even though it's that quick, you slow down. And it's very similar when you're in that zone shooting those free throws. You can get everything to slow down. So when you can embrace that and you can use that to your advantage. And so what does that mean for an entrepreneur? You're going into a business meeting and your laptop crashes, or you're getting ready to meet with somebody and your number one investor just pulled out. How do we counter that? Now, what happens is your body can only maintain that level for a very short amount of time. To deprogram it, that's the parasympathetic system. And what's going to happen, it's going to flood your body with these other types of chemicals that are going to cause you to crash really fast, because otherwise that adrenaline your heart literally will explode. You could have a stroke. So when you have a situation like a car accident, and you see a near-death experience, you just burst out in tears. And you're like, I'm crying, but I don't even know why I'm crying. That's your body's way of trying to bring it back down. So when you can learn that, and I really go into depth on this in the book, and to train your system to understand what's happening and how you can use that to your advantage rather than getting to that freeze point, I think that's a really great skill that people can hone and train. It's essential when you're in positions like a firefighter, a police officer, law enforcement, the military. But I think it's also really important as an entrepreneur and as a business leader.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in some ways, these past couple of years it's been a positive trend to really bring this more into a light. You did mention breath and the importance of breath. I have had actually when I was growing up, and I still practice now, especially now as I go on court. One of the fun things is trying all the things I used to do and getting back to some of my tennis routine and connecting with breath, whether it's through meditation or doing breathing practices. At least actually breath is something that's been really connected to serenity, clearing our mind. There's so many studies about the importance of different breathing exercises and the impact of it on your parasympathetic and sympathetic system and how you balance those two. And actually in the book, start the book with your COVID experience that you almost couldn't breathe and how awful that was because you almost got put on a ventilator. I'm curious now, as you look back at that situation that you actually describe in the book as being close to the abyss and crucible, one of the things you have faced, how do you look at breath, and do you take the ability to breathe now as something that is much more valuable than perhaps before this experience?
You know, there's a common saying that you don't know what you've got till you've lost it.
Yeah.
And breathing is not something we think about doing. It just happens. But try pinching your nose, blocking your mouth and seeing how long you go. And it'll instantly start that panic when you try to take that breath and it doesn't work. Your whole entire biology, your whole entire anatomy is all based off of oxygen. Your heart pumps so it can push the blood that carries the oxygen cells. If your lungs don't work, your heart's not going to work because it's not going to be able to pull that oxygen. It all comes in there. So having that deep cleansing breath, as we say, that breath that comes in nourishes you, that breath that comes out and cleanses you of that stress and that power. So important. And that's a big component of meditation and other type of areas. The number one thing you can do when you're faced with what we call the amygdala hijack, which is that point where you've got that emergency, is the first thing you do is oxygenate. Really take a big, deep breath to have your brain be able to process and understand what's going on in the situation. So breath and breathing is important. And again, for me, living down here on the coast and waking up in the morning, doing my little morning routine and taking that first big smell of beautiful, great salt air that you get also probably out in California, it certainly sets you up in a different way.
Yeah. As you look back on the past couple of years, I mean, you have gone yourself through a lot, even with experiencing the COVID threat that many people have been worried about. Are there specific things you're most optimistic about as you look ahead?
That's a great question. No one's really asked me about that. I think I've done a lot of things wrong. I've done a lot of things right. For me, I don't have a lot of happiness when I win, but I have a ton of upset and sorrow when I lose. And my new mission in life, and what I am so optimistic about now, is taking other people on that journey with me and teaching them what I did wrong and teaching them what I did right, and trying to make a meaningful life where I can now help other people. And that's really what my focus is going to be on over the next decade or so.
Fantastic. We previously talked about training. Anything you want to highlight?
I'm really excited to announce, and it's probably still about a month or two away, is I'm doing an online journey. It's not going to be an online training. It's going to be a true journey. It's going to be a process where you can go through a series of exercises online. Some of it will be virtual, where we take you through each one of those steps in the warrior journey. And then we apply it to business and how to build and grow and lead a business. And that will include everything from public speaking events by me to one-on-one coaching sessions to online education components. It's a whole movement based around those warrior traits that we talked about today and how you can apply them. It will be really focused more on entrepreneurship and small business growth, but it's really for anybody that can apply it to any area in their life. So website, warriorontrepreneurbook.com. Please make sure you register and put your information in the contact us page, so that way I can keep you on the list and let you know when these next things come out.
I found your book super fun to read. It's been so thought-provoking, very motivational. I love the stories of the heroes you have highlighted. Many of them I wasn't even aware of, including fantastic quotes, some of my favorites that fit perfectly with some of the attributes and characters. I think your book itself is a fantastic message to the world, how to be a warrior on all fronts, as you started the podcast, whether you're an entrepreneur or you have been part of an Army, Marine Corps, Navy, or you're an athlete. I think everybody can find a piece in it for themselves. I know you are very active on LinkedIn. Anything else? Where can people find you?
So my email is real simple. It's my name, Zachary L. Green @Gmail, ZACHARY, green just like the color, no E on the end. And then warriorontrepreneurbook.com. Those are the best ways to get in touch with me.
Perfect. I'll add that in the episode notes so people can easily look it up. And I know your book is available on Amazon. That's how I got it. It's available in audiobook, Kindle edition, paper, and hardcover. Anywhere else you would suggest people buy it?
Pretty much anywhere books are sold, Barnes and Nobles, but go to the warriorontrepreneurbook.com. You get it directly from me, and I'm more than happy to hand sign and autograph any books that people purchase from me directly.
I love that.
All right, Clara, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day, Zachary.